Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today on this Friday morning after what has been, I'm sure, a very busy week for all of you and a very busy month. It's a very busy period for all of our speakers, and so we're just grateful that we found a moment to all get together for this short, intense debrief on the Epbd, where we are now and where we need to go in the next months. So the purpose of this presentation today is, this discussion today is to look at, first of all, the EU Buildings Climate Tracker that BPIE, the Buildings Performance Institute Europe, recently developed, and then to discuss how the Epbd, what the Epbd can do about this. What can we do about this growing decarbonisation gap, which BPIE has identified? Next slide, please. So housekeeping, how to participate very quickly. I think that we all know how to do this. We're using GoToWebinar today. In the audience, as we have a big audience, you are all automatically muted. Please submit your questions via the questions panel. Avoid the chat. We won't be checking the chat. We can't balance looking at questions boxes and chat at the same time. So just use the questions box for your questions for speakers, and we'll do our best to address them, but we do have a pretty full agenda today, so we'll see how it goes. But we can also follow up with you bilaterally if you have anything that is urgent and we weren't able to address. And then next slide. So my name is Caroline Milne. I didn't introduce myself. I'm the head of communications at BPIE, and it's my privilege to moderate today's session. As you can see, and I think that you're all here because we have such a strong lineup of speakers. We have Paula Garcia, Deputy Head of Buildings and Products at DG Energy, European Commission. We have Morten Petersen. He is the MEP and Shadow Rapporteur for the Epbd from Renew Europe in Denmark. We have Morten Pejřimovský, who is Energy Attaché at the Permanent Representation of the Czech Republic to the EU, so he has a lot of responsibility on his shoulders at the moment. We have Louise Coffino, who is Policy Advisor for Environment and Climate at Eurocities, and then we have my own boss and our Oliver Rapp, who is Executive Director at BPIE, and he will be presenting today on our climate tracker. So next slide. So unfortunately, we invited Ciaran Cuffe, and we really wanted him to join, and he really wanted to be with us, but his schedule just made it impossible. So, but we will have a short opening statement from him. He was kind enough to send a video from Strasbourg, actually. So we will start off with that. I think that will be a good context setter, and we will go right into the launch of the EU Buildings Climate Tracker, presented by Oliver Rapp. And then we'll have a panel discussion. And the discussion will exactly look at how do we close this buildings decarbonization gap through the Epbd revision, and then closing remarks, and then everyone gets on with their day, but all a little bit smarter and more well-informed. So next slide, please. So, no, sorry, just pause this and we'll stop. We'll go right into we'll go right into Ciaran's welcoming opening remarks.
How are you? I'm Ciaran Cuffe, and I'm the rapporteur for the European Parliament for the revisions to the energy performance of Buildings Directive. I'm really sorry I can't be with you today, but my friend and colleague Morten Petersen is there, and I'm sure he can speak quite capably in my absence. The Epbd is hugely important. We know that buildings use 40% of the energy in Europe and are responsible for 36% of the greenhouse gas emissions. But more importantly, buildings have a hugely important role in tackling energy poverty. There's going to be too many households suffering in the cold this winter, and we want to ensure that they don't have the choice between food or fuel. We won't solve this challenge overnight, but I know that the revisions of the Energy Performance Buildings Directive in improving the thermal rating, the energy rating of buildings will help us. It will also help release the finance that's necessary to make the changes and to double the rate of renovations in Europe. The work that you're publishing today has a hugely important role in this, and we'll only succeed if we're working together, not just in the different countries or member states around Europe, but if we're working together across the different political groups. We're all united in tackling energy poverty. We're all united in tackling climate change, but we need to accelerate this, and with your help, we can do so in the months and years ahead.
I would say thank you to Ciarán. He's not actually here to hear me say thank you, but I think that we all appreciate his opening remarks. And now, Oliver, the floor is over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Caroline, for the introduction. And if we could go to the first slide, which we have on the tracker. I found it personally very encouraging to hear Ciarán just say that he's working together across the political parties, across the political groups, because I think we do need a lot of collaboration, and we do need consensus building to address this enormous challenge we have in front of us. Now, the tracker which we developed recently focuses on decarbonisation. It puts decarbonisation and the question whether we are in line with the Paris Agreement at the center of the discussion. But of course, we know that if we decarbonize the building stock, if we make our buildings more efficient, make them healthier, we are tackling many other problems as well, in particular social problems like energy poverty and poor health in poorly insulated buildings and poorly ventilated buildings. So this tracker is asking the question, is the sector on track to achieve the Paris Agreement? It's an index. It doesn't have a unit, and I will explain a little bit of the technical background in a moment, but we wanted to create one figure to make it easier to track that progress. And it's not the first time we have developed such a tracker. We actually started this tracking work on the global level for the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, and the first global tracker was already released 2 years ago, and there will be shortly a third edition coming out of that global tracker in November, and our intention is to do something similar on the European level on an annual basis. Next slide, please. The tracker is answering 3 key questions. Really, how is the decarbonization of the building stock in the EU evolving since 2015? And we chose 2015 as the starting year simply because that was the year when the Paris Agreement was signed and when the world, and of course also the European member states, made the commitment to accelerate decarbonization policies. Caroline, I think you have your microphone on, at least I hear some background noise. Second, we want to know whether we are on track to achieve climate neutrality. Europe has committed to become climate neutral by 2050, and so this is another measure for the tracker. And we also want to describe how the gap between the ideal pathway to climate neutrality and the real performance is developing. Hopefully that gap is closing, but we'll see about that in a moment. Next slide, please. So what we have done is summarized in this little graph, and I want to explain it a little bit. The dashed line, which starts at 0 in 2015 and goes all the way to 100 in 2050, is the line which symbolizes decarbonization. So if our real performance is on this line, we're well on track to climate neutrality by 2050. But what we are in fact observing at this very moment is the blue dark line on the left bottom corner in the red circle, where we see that actually decarbonization, since we started to measure in 2015, has gone the wrong way. It has gone that the index has gone down, and only in the last 3 years it's closing into the ideal pathway again. But in fact, we are still far away from the ideal pathway, and I'll explain in a moment why that is the case. I said earlier we have chosen 6 sub-indicators to construct the index. If you please go to the next slide. We will see that the result is that we must increase and accelerate our rate of decarbonization, because this tracking shows that we are moving not enough and we're not fast enough on the decarbonization. And of course, the Epbd has a very important role to play in accelerating that change. That's the basic idea behind it. Next slide, please. So I said we use 6 different indicators, which are summarized here, and that's a little bit of methodological background. We have chosen these indicators, of course, CO2 emissions from buildings, direct and indirect, both from households and non-residential buildings are a key element of the tracker, but also the final energy consumption in households and services, that is non-residential buildings, together make up 50% of the weight of the tracker. And then we have 4 supplemental indicators. One of them is the improvement in EPC ratings over time. Another one is the renewable energy share, and actually renewable energy share both in heating and in electrification. Another one is the accumulated investment in housing renovation. How is that increasing, hopefully? And the last one is the annual domestic energy expenditure, which we ideally want to see going down. Now, of course, there are some complications with that, with the inflation and the price spikes which we see at the moment, but we're normalizing that figure in the methodology, so to get real comparative values. If we can go to the next slide, please. I just want to show you the development of 3 indicators just as examples, so that you know and understand what is actually happening. So what you're seeing here are the CO2 emissions from non-residential buildings and how they evolve over time. The dark blue bars are the bars which show the current performance, and the lighter blue is the pathway to climate neutrality. So of course we want to have 0 CO2 emissions coming from non-residential buildings, and the goal value which we defined artificially is 100 to create that index, and the starting value is 0. And you can see already that the dark blue bars are longer than the light blue bars. That means simply we're currently not on track of the pathway, even though the emissions were 3% lower than in 2015. But they should in fact have decreased by 14% in total to be on track with the decarbonization pathway. Next slide, please. And on the next slide, we're showing you another example of the sub-indicators we're using to construct the index. So this is the final energy consumption in households. We actually see again, same logic, dark blue bars are the real performance, the light blue bars are the ideal pathway. We actually see that final energy consumption in 2016, 2017 even increased, so moved away from the ideal pathway. Then the consumption decreased a little bit, but we are still, of course, as you see here, not in line with the light blue pathways. And that is one of the gaps which we urgently need to close. And on the next slide, you see the 3rd example. Here we're talking about the use of renewable energy in heating and cooling. You can hardly see the dark blue bars on this graph, the real performance, because the progress is so small. We know that the renewable energy share in heating and cooling should have increased by 11.3 percentage points. But however, in reality, the improvement, the change was only 2.1 percentage points. So a big gap here in achieving a higher share of renewable energy in heating and cooling, which is one of the big dilemmas and the big challenges which we are facing. And the next slide, please. So if we look at all the individual sub-indicators, and I've chosen to show you only 3 of them, we know that CO2 emissions from energy use in buildings is off track. The final energy consumption for households and services is even further off track because the gap is really much bigger. The improvement in EPC ratings, you see here the information is not trackable. It is not trackable because we have chosen the first time this year that we're going to start monitoring that. And so as of next year, this will be trackable. But we think that energy performance certificates are a strong indicator how the building stock is changing, and therefore we have included it. But it doesn't have a value, it doesn't go into the calculation this year, but it will go into the calculation as of next year. The renewable energy share for heating and cooling is off track, as I've just shown you, but we know that the renewable energy share in electricity consumption is performing much better. So there we are almost on track. And with the investment which we are observing at the moment in renovation in real terms, we are also almost on track. I have not shown you the detailed sub-indicator, but it's of course documented in the report which we are launching. And interestingly enough, the annual domestic energy expenditure per household in real terms until 2019, I have to say, is on track. So that means that this energy expenditure really has been going down, in particular as we normalize it for 2010 prices. Now, as we go ahead in the coming years, we of course expect to see the real price development having an impact, but we'll see how strong that impact will be when we normalize it. So the next slide, please, is then showing us the evolution in much more detail. So again, you have a zooming in now in the last period, which we are observing from 2015 to 2019. The dashed line is the ideal decarbonization pathway, and the dark blue line is what we have observed and calculated. And I said earlier, the values which you see there, they don't have a unit. It's really an index, and the ideal scenario in the future in 2050 will be an achievement of 100 points. The starting point was 0. And today we are reporting that in 2019 we were at 0.5 points. You see, if you look at the curve, that the first was a deterioration and then an improvement. But the real gap, which are the yellow numbers in the graph on the right, is increasing because our progress in decarbonization is simply too slow. So the gap in 2016 was 8 points, and in 2019 it's 14 points. And the reason why we are reporting 2019 figures simply has to do with the availability of statistics from Eurostat, for example, which go into this calculation. There is always a delay with which we just have to live, but I think it is important to show the trend which we're seeing, and it will be quite interesting to see in the coming years how the pandemic and of course the energy price crisis which we have at the moment will have an impact on the decarbonization. But at the moment we have to conclude that the decarbonization is not happening nearly fast enough, and we are off track to achieve climate neutrality. Therefore we really must change much faster. We must accelerate our change. We must accelerate the rate of building decarbonization. And therefore, the logical step is that the Epbd remission must be as ambitious as possible, and that we don't have any time to lose. We don't have the luxury to wait until a further revision. We really must get it right now. And with that, I would like to close and hand the floor back over to Caroline for the discussion and the reactions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver. So I invite all of our speakers to turn your cameras back on and to join us. And perfect. I think we can just turn off the screen sharing for now so we can see everyone's faces a bit more fully. So what we're going to do, I have a couple key questions that I would like to ask everyone, and so I'll give you all the chance to respond. Obviously, I think we knew this from the beginning, but the 14 points, a 14-point decarbonization gap is huge. The graphs are very impressive. It's a little frightening to see how slowly we've been reacting since the signature of the Paris Agreement and how slow progress has been. And I think that we're all very aware of this now. So my question to all of you that I'll ask you one by one to answer would be very basic, but from your view, how do we make sure that the Epbd is as ambitious as possible to close this growing gap? How can we up the ambition level? That is my first big question. And actually, I'm interested to hear from the council first, because we all want to know what's going on in the council. So Morten, can you start us off, please?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the floor. I would like to thank Oliver and the whole BPI team for the perfect presentation and the impressive data that you managed to put together. And I also want to congratulate you on the timing, because this is the perfect time to be having this conversation. This is a perfect time to be having this conference and to talk about the revision of the Epbd. I agree that an ambitious recast of the Epbd is needed. It's something that is felt within the council walls, that the Epbd that we have now, it was it was adopted under different circumstances that we are facing now, but it was quite ambitious for that time. Nevertheless, it's not enough for now, and it's not enough for the challenges that we'll be facing tomorrow and in the decades after, especially considering everything that's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the complete revision of a lot of truths and beliefs that were connected to the way we are running our economy. I would want to maybe highlight a little bit of the process that was leading all the way up to the point where we are now. I mean, it was already in 2020 when the Commission adopted their communication on the renovation wave, which set in motion the rethinking of the way how to approach the decarbonisation of the building stock. I'm convinced that this was a very important document that set a lot of things into motion. Then the Council followed up in 2021 with our own Council conclusions on the renovation wave, when we agreed with the Commission that we need an ambitious recast of the Epbd, and we need to aim at least at doubling the renovation wave, the renovation rate, sorry, in the EU. And this was closely followed by the communication on the new European Bauhaus. And now we are in a situation where we are redrafting or recasting the Epbd. I would like to assure everyone that despite everything that's going on, despite the crisis management mode in which the presidency is right now, we are doing everything in our power to make sure that the revision of the Epbd is on track, and that the goals and the timeline that were set in motion before the Czech presidency is being upheld. It is not easy because, as you know, there's a lot of extraordinary councils coming in our way. There's a lot of new legislation that we had no idea that would be on the table, and these things just keep on coming. The situation on the electricity market and gas market is extremely volatile and unpredictable, so this is something that needs to be solved. And oftentimes the same people who work on the immediate solutions to the crisis that we are going through now are the same people that are setting, the agenda and that are influencing the way the other energy files are being run. So this leads into a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of weekends where we are just working 7 days per week. But we are trying to survive this, and I think we are succeeding in this regard. So as for the Epbd, we are now successfully in a process of pushing the legislative train forward. We have finished the drafting of the revision 3 earlier this week, We've published it just yesterday, essentially, and already on Monday we are having a full discussion on draft 3 in the Council. This is really an unprecedented speed with which we are pushing the file through, and under normal circumstances we would probably receive some negative feedback from the member states that we are going too fast. Nevertheless, considering the crisis, considering everything that's going on, everyone is now ready to step far away from their comfort zone, and everyone is ready to make sure that the EPBD is on track, and we managed to get the general approach during the Czech presidency. And we think that this will open the way, or we are convinced that having a general approach in the Council during the Czech presidency will open the way for the Swedish presidency to conclude the trilogues with the Parliament. And this is something that's extremely important, because the EPBD is part of the answer. It's not part of maybe the immediate short-term solution to the energy crisis that we are going through now, but it's definitely a part of the midterm and long-term solution. And that's why we need a revision that is at the same time as ambitious as possible and technically feasible and economically feasible. It needs to be achievable by all member states, because at the end of the day, the bottom line is that through the recast of the EPBD, we are setting sort of a bottom line that each and every member state should achieve when it comes to decarbonizing their building stock. Every member state, should they decide to do so, should be able and will be able to pursue more ambitious national policies if they think that this is something that's economically feasible, or if they think that this is something that is in line with their national circumstances. But this revision of the EPBD nevertheless will be ambitious enough, and it will be almost revolutionary compared to the EPBD that's on the table up until today, because especially Article 9, I'm sure that we'll dive deep into that article during the course of the debate, but especially the introduction of the minimum energy performance standard, that's something that's unprecedented. That's something where the EU needs to get it right. It needs to be carefully tweaked both in the Council as well in the Parliament, and then through the trilogues. Because I think that this is where the EU could establish or could confirm and solidify its global leadership when it comes to the buildings policy. And I think that this could be a good standard then to be sold to the rest of the world, and a good way forward how to inspire our trading partners and political allies outside the EU in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Morten. It was a lot, and it was good to hear that the EPBD is such a priority in the Council, and that you are working these sleepless nights. This is, I think, what we're hoping for. We're hoping that our politicians are, are working their absolute hardest to make sure that our policies are good for all of Europeans. Morten, can I ask you to maybe, coming back to the question, because we will also flesh out a few more details as the discussion goes on. So Morten, from your perspective now, how do we make sure that the EPBD is as ambitious as possible?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me this morning, and thanks for this study that you're doing. I mean, it's extremely valuable in order to track progress, or rather lack of progress, because I have to say the conclusions weren't that uplifting on a rainy morning in Copenhagen, but it clearly shows the magnitude of challenges ahead of us. So thanks for this. This is very useful and handy in the process. Now, it's still early days in Parliament and our negotiations on this specific files. We've had 2 technical meetings and 1 shadows meeting this week in Strasbourg, and as you know, we're supposed to vote in the committee end of October as of now, and hopefully plenary vote for December, meaning that if this timetable is on track, we will, as Martin was saying, we should be able to startup trilogues, end of year, hopefully start of 23. Now, so saying that it's still early days, meaning also that we will have a lot of the overall discussions on basically on subsidiarity. I mean, to which extent should Parliament or the EU as such and at large go into the finer details in all these issues? There'll be a lot of political resistance in terms of not being too prescriptive, being in terms of say technological choices or applications or what have you. So we'll have a lot of very differing opinions on these very overall broad overarching issues, which will make it difficult at the end of the day, because there are big differences among the political groups, also internally in the political groups, obviously depending on where people are coming from and backgrounds and what have you. So we'll have a lot of discussions on the finer print on whether actions or issues, whether they should be mandatory or voluntary. I mean, to which extent should we prescribe and describe what to do on a European level vis-a-vis what member states should be doing on their own or want to be doing on their own? So overall speaking, we'll have a lot of these very classical disagreements on coming into play in this file as well. I'd say overall that timing is good on a very, very sad background. Something as nerdy and technical as a Buildings Directive is now becoming security policy from the upper shelf, which I guess no one had imagined just 6 months ago. So I think the momentum is definitely right and completely different compared to last time around when we were revising the Buildings Directive. So there is a sense of urgency, and I think it's fair to say that it also feeds into the atmosphere in the negotiations so far, but it is still early days. We've just been touching on smart readiness of buildings and technical building systems, information tools, what have you. So all this to say that the study that you've been doing is great, and it's really inspirational, and it just demonstrates fully that we need to step up, and obviously this is what I hope to see coming through when we're through with all these hard negotiations. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Morten. I'm going to do something a little bit untraditional now. I was planning on having the institutions all go first, but I would like to invite Louise from Eurocities to respond also to your question of subsidiarity, because Louise has been working and doing lots of capacity building directly with cities and helping. She's very knowledgeable about the challenges cities face in, I think, building up one-stop shops, which is something that we've been hearing about a lot, especially with the EED. So I'd like to ask Louise, how, from your perspective and from the city's perspective, how do we make sure that the Epbd is as ambitious as possible?
Thank you very much, Ciarán. My turn to thank BPIE for the invitation, and also for this climate tracker. We'll need it in the years ahead. So I work for Eurocities, a network of more than 200 large European cities, and we cover all the competencies of these big cities, including building decarbonization. So I'm very glad to come to talk about it today, because, you know, cities, they have a huge role to play when it comes to the decarbonization of buildings. They manage a big portfolio of buildings, public, commercial. They have also urban planning competencies, and they also can drive the market thanks to their purchasing power. This is why I think including local authorities in discussions like this one we're having today is very great. So thank you very much for the invitation. So in order to close this decarbonization gap, you know, cities are doing already a lot. And I could mention a couple of examples, but just the €1 house experimentation in Lille Metropole, you know, to promote renovation over demolition. In Helsinki, they are renovating the existing building up with bio-based construction to save some land. In Ghent, they have opened a one-stop shop to ease also the process of renovation for their citizens. In Vienna, they are using pre-demolition audits, you know, to assess which materials could be reused from one project to another one. So I have plenty of those examples, but what I wanted to share is that cities cannot do everything on their own. They need the right EU and national framework, and this is where I think Epbd has a huge role to play. So for me, I see three enabling conditions really in this in this recast of Epbd, and it was mentioned by Morten, the minimum energy performance standards. To our opinion, it should be set in consultation with the local level, actually, to make sure it fits to the local context, and it really help harness, this untapped potential that we can see in cities. And also special attention should be given to all those households at risk. Those tenants with security of tenure may be put at risk by implementing some MEP. So I think it's important. We are absolutely in favor, but it should be set with in consultation with cities. I think it's very important. The second enabling condition is definitely deep renovation. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but it's absolutely key. And for that, member states should definitely provide technical assistance, financial support, and training to local authorities, on deeper renovation. It's really important to give some flexibility to cities. I will give you an example, because renovation has been implemented in cities for a couple of years already. So for those building owners that have already made some progress, actually on renovation over time, have already reached some level of energy savings, it will be harder to achieve further improvements in a short period of time. So this is why a step-to-step approach could be a solution, and this is why, again, consultation with the local authorities could be very, very helpful for deep renovation. And one last point that Caroline mentioned is the one-stop shops. We do believe a lot in it at Eurocities and with our cities. There's a one-stop shop that can give one point to the homeowners where they can find trusted, free of charge, independent advice for building renovation. I will give you the example of Vienna, for instance. They have this project called Reno Booster, where they set up a one-stop shop for private owners of residential buildings, and there they can obtain information about how to renovate, and also the technical aspect, but also where they could find funding and financial schemes in order to achieve their renovation. So all of that, in a nutshell, is what we believe could be some enabling condition put into the recast of the Epbd.
Thank you, Louise, for that very detailed, and you painted a great picture. Actually, it's great to hear some practical examples, especially amidst when we see the 14 how the decarbonisation gap and the 14 points. It's great to see all of these positive examples, that we aren't short of positive examples. We just have to implement them more. And so, yes, it's very frightening that we are behind, but we have every reason to believe that we can catch up. We have all the material. We just have to do it, actually. Paula, I would like to come to you now. The European Commission provided this proposal in December 2021. And so you were at the very beginning of the process. And I guess my question for you is really twofold. Of course, how do we make sure that the Epbd is as ambitious as possible? But right now you're a bit outside of, you're not in the negotiations at the moment. And at the same time in December, we'd only had a few months of, rising energy prices and discomfort, and it was quite unclear how long this was going to last. I have an issue of The Economist that I bought in January 2022 with the predictions of the big things that were going to happen in the next year. And the whole magazine has one tiny paragraph about Russia. There's nothing about Ukraine. I don't think any of us, it's just to say, I think that we're all shocked. I imagine that none of us expected to be where we are now. So I know that the Commission has been at the forefront, having to rapidly change tack and propose solutions constantly. So my question for you is really, I would like to hear, of course, about how we can make the Epbd ambitious, but maybe what would the Commission have done differently? Would the proposals have been designed differently had we known then what we know now?
Thank you very much, Caroline, and good morning, everybody. And also thanks from my side to BPA for this tracker, because I think one element that we are often missing is really this focus on data, and bringing data also to the political level, who needs to decide now how to go about this revision now that is in negotiation with Council and with Parliament. So I think indeed the tracker is very timely and very useful, and we should maximize the information that is there. So first on the ambition. So I think that here there were a couple of keywords mentioned already by previous speakers, and I would really stick to accelerate to this element of the sense of urgency. I think this was already there where we put the proposal in December 2021, but then with the developments that we had, unfortunately, since February this year, this sense is now even further emphasized by everybody, and really buildings are at the center. So I think here I would like to mention maybe a couple of figures because they are also very telling and very much along the lines of the tracker. So first, on the importance of the sector, I think that we are still missing this message really being absorbed by everybody at the political level. I mean, this sector is fundamental for climate change, is fundamental for energy poverty, as Mr. Cuffe was saying. Is also fundamental for competitiveness, for modernization of the sector, as also mentioned by Mr. Petersen. So really is a sector that is so important to tackle from so many angles. And if we add now the security of supply concerns and the energy prices, what other sector is as important as buildings, with the link to heating and cooling, with the link to our energy bills? So I think everything that we can do now to bring attention to the importance of this sector will possibly even fall short of the needs that are there. Because looking only at the decarbonisation of the sector, we already knew in December 2021 that the emissions of buildings needed to be reduced by 60% to meet the 55% target. And we already knew there that the biggest focus needed to be on the residential sector. So if we connect these elements to what was presented by Oliver with the tracker, that already raises the alarms. And this was thinking about the December proposal. We also estimated, in fact, that with the revision as we had proposed it back then, without the recent developments, we would deliver 50% of the decarbonisation effort that is needed in the residential sector and 40% of the one that is needed in the services sector. So if we turn this around, without the ambition that was put there already in December, we would fall short of at least half of the effort that is needed for the residential sector. So this is really very important. Buildings are key, and within buildings, the residential sector is the key one that we really need to tackle, with all the challenges that it has, but also with all the benefits that come with it, especially if we think about worst performing buildings. So then if we look also about the current context, then it's important to mention as well that 35% of direct consumption of natural gas in the EU comes from the building sector. So I think we have all the elements there to know how important it is to keep the ambition and this thinking only about the December proposal. But then you also made a link, of course, to what happened after. And there, as you know, with the Repower package of May, what we have tried to do is to, without, of course, trying to derail too much the process that was already going on with the other institutions, still put forward a number of very important reinforcement in terms of legal amendments that, in addition, flagging areas of attention for Council and for Parliament as part of the ongoing negotiation. So in terms of amendments, as you know, increase energy efficiency target in the EED, increase renewables target in the Renewables Directive. But what is the key delivery tool for those if you come to the demand side, if you come to buildings? Well, the Buildings Directive, this is the one that through MEPs in particular will deliver those targets, because there is nothing worse than a target that remains just on paper and is not really delivering on the ground. And for that, we really need ambitious MEPs, because that, as it was mentioned already, is really a key element that needs to come through this revision to trigger the renovation rates that are needed and the transformation of the sector. And then other important elements that we put forward are, of course, the solar amendment to the Epbd, to really benefit from all the surface that is there available and not in competition with other needs. and bringing direct benefits to citizens. And in the Repower package, we highlight the number of areas that were also very important. Of course, heating and cooling, renewables in heating and cooling, phasing out fossil fuels in heating. All those elements also don't look so good so far in the tracker as presented by Oliver. Similarly, of course, the MEPs, thinking about moving forward ambition, but with an enabling framework around, because of course this is an area that cannot work in isolation just with a legal obligation. It needs to bring financing around, it needs to bring an improvement of certificates. So I think these are some of the elements that we see are even more urgent with the current context. And if the proposal would have come afterwards, they would have been even more reinforced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Oliver, I'd like to give the floor over to you. Really, it's your opportunity to reflect, to have any inputs that you have on what you've heard here right now.
Yeah, thank you. Well, looking at the barriers which Morten described and which Martin described to a more ambitious agreement of either all the political groups or all the member states, I can understand some of the concerns, in particular about subsidiarity, because we're not regulating a unique and harmonious product here, like washing machines, which are all the same in Europe. We are trying to drive change in a sector which is very diversified, rather fragmented often, and really defined by national circumstances. That's clear. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the policies which we agree upon and which will then be implemented by the member states really live up to the challenges of our time. And I have a little bit the feeling that, of course, the policy making is now driven by the acceleration of crises. The climate change crisis is accelerating, the geopolitical security crisis is accelerating, energy poverty is accelerating. So policy making is reacting to it, while I actually think ideally policy making anticipates and therefore avoids strong impacts of future crises on citizens. And I think that's the spirit which we need to have in mind, that we now have to agree a policy package which is not only reacting to the current crisis, but also essentially providing an insurance policy for European citizens that whatever future crisis there will be, they will be less hard hit. And I think that should be the spirit of policy making, and that should drive the ambition level of the agreement. How then the ambition level is translated into national policies? Yes, it should be left to a certain degree to the member states, but it's the ambition level that counts, and it's the dynamic of change which we need to build into the political agreement, also when it comes to minimum energy performance standards and all the other important tools and instruments which should be there, such as comprehensive information, but also really incentivizing renovation through the right financial instruments and all of these things. So it's the dynamic which we need to build in, that we can really anticipate and dampen the impact of crisis, which will probably, unfortunately, for sure, come in the future. And that would be my main message to the coming months, to the processes in which all the three institutions will engage in the coming months.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, I have a similar follow-up question, actually, and I think it touches on some of the things that I've already heard, but I'm not getting a total sense of clarity on what's really happening inside the institutions. And I know that it's not possible for you to maybe tell us everything, but you've all said this tracker is great, it's come at the right time, it's so great to have data. We've already had data before. We have the IPCC reports are, like, I think the first and biggest example that I have in mind. And BPIE, we've published many reports in the past year showing where member states aren't on track for this, and this, for what's going right, what's going wrong. So I'm very happy, but how will you be able to, this is specifically for both for Morten and for Martin, how will you be able to use this? Will this really make a difference, is what I'm saying. Will you really be able to push this and make a difference to build consensus? I know that some parties and some member states are not on the same page when it comes to some very important provisions in the EPBD. So my question would really be, how can you use this to push to overcome those bottlenecks? And maybe a follow-up question would be if you could tell us a bit about what the key bottlenecks are right now in building consensus. Maybe Morten, I'll give the floor over to you first.
Thank you very much. I'm in a tricky situation because presiding the council means that the member states share their deepest fears with me, and they count on my discretion. So I'm going to be a bit general on this topic. Nevertheless, I would say that the member states are aware of what's going on, and they are aware of the benefits of speeding up the renovation rate in each and every member state. What the member states fear is that we will put together a framework that will not allow for sufficient flexibilities and that will not allow for taking into account the national circumstances, which are vastly different across the EU. We have different climate zones, we have different economic history. The EU as such is a very, very diverse animal, so we need to make sure that the EPBD recast will take this into account. And if we succeed, and if we really make sure that we listen to each and every member state and take into account all of their worries and concerns that they might have, then I think that we'll be able to put together an EPBD that will get a unanimous approval. I know that in the energy field we vote by qualified majority, but this is not the way we want to go. We really feel that this is a super important file that deserves unanimous support in the council, because this is also something that will then give us a good position in the coming into the trialogues. But the worries and the main bottlenecks that you were asking about, it is something that Morten was talking about in his intervention. He was much more blunt and much more open, but this is something that we are debating in the council as well. I mean, essential questions pertaining to subsidiarity, the flexibility versus ambition. We are always trying to find a way that maintains the ambition on the highest level as possible, but at the same time allows for sufficient flexibilities. The question is how to square the circle. Very often there need to be solutions that are horizontal level, deals that need to be made. But we are taking this step by step and revision by revision, and we hope that ultimately we will succeed. There are technical debates that are very intellectually stimulating. For example, on the REPowerEU proposal, the question of technology neutrality. I mean, is the solar the only way to go, or should we focus on supporting all forms of renewable energies? Is this something that, for example, could be a little bit tweaked, the article, or is it something that will take a different shape and form in the trialogues? We don't know. So this is just to give you an idea of what we are discussing. Then, of course, the minimum energy performance standards. There is an extremely sensitive topic of single-family houses, private houses, villas, etc. Extremely, unbelievably politically sensitive. There is an agreement that all buildings, each and every one of us, somehow need to take part in the motion that's ongoing, the path toward decarbonization. That's something that everyone is part of. But how to make sure that this is legally sound in each and every member state, and that people will still feel safe in their homes regardless of their income, regardless of the availability of mortgages at the some moment in their time, in their lives, etc., etc. This is something that needs or requires a high level of scrutiny, and really we are leaving no stone unturned. Those who are attending the drafting sessions and that are including Paula can confirm that this is not an easy debate, and we are really make sure that we will ultimately find a balanced solution that will allow for everyone and every minister to come home after the council and say to their electorates, to their government, that this is a good deal and this is ambitious but achievable, and let's make sure that we all transpose and implement this EPBD to the best of our abilities. Because the worst thing that could happen is that we would have something that would be so extremely ambitious that too many member states would feel that there is no way how to actually achieve it. And that would create an atmosphere of defeatism, and it would limit the way the member states are, the resources that the member states would be putting into implementing this. This would be actually detrimental to the EPBD as such. So this is why we are taking extra time. And fortunately, there is time still during the Czech presidency. Even though everything that's going on, as I said at the beginning, we have enough manpower to really make sure that the EPBD general approach will be sound, as ambitious as possible, but achievable. Thank you.
Thank you. We're very close to the end of time, and I don't want to go much over time. So, Morten, I'd like to hear from you quickly, and then I'll have a final follow-up question to Louise as well, and to Paula, and then I guess we'll wrap things up. So please go ahead, but please be mindful that we don't have much.
Sure, I'll be brief, and I'll do something as unusual as actually praise council and the remark that Martin just made here, because I think it is really an important point to make that. And don't get me wrong, I'd be on the on the ambitious side on these things. I'd be advocating for mandatory. I'd be prescriptive in choice of technologies. I'll do all the stuff trying to push this as far as possible in an ambitious direction. But we need to ensure that this actually can get implemented also, because it would be so unfortunate and very sad if it were to be the case what Martin just described. So I think that it is important to be aware of the sensitivities, the real sensitivities that are out there in the member states. But I think it's at least from Parliament's side, we'll be trying to push this limit, but we also have to ensure that there is a balance to this, that member states can see themselves in this outcome, because if not, then we won't have achieved much. But I think that there is much room to get into and to move this file, hopefully, and then of course we'll have some tough negotiations at the end. Thanks.
Thank you. Louise, my question for you would be, I think you already said this, but can you just sum up right now, what do cities really need from the EPBD?
Yes, so thank you very much, Ciarán. So I've mentioned already the minimum energy performance standards, deep renovation, one-stop shop. If I could just add two things, is the technical assistance and capacity building. Technical assistance, I'm not gonna go into too many examples, but for instance, to include the global warming potential in purchasing power in tenders in cities. Sometimes it looks like something very, very complicated to achieve, and this is why local authorities, they will need technical support, and guidance on how best to use their purchasing power, to drive the market towards building decarbonisation. And I'm sorry we didn't manage to talk about global potential, global warming potential. I think it's absolutely key. I know it's a topic that BPIE also has at heart, and it's in Ciaran Cuffe report, and I hope that the political groups at the European Parliament and then the Council will support that, because it's a huge part of the emissions at the moment, and we definitely need to take into account the whole life carbon cycle of our buildings if we really want to decarbonize. I close this bracket about embodied carbon, and I go to capacity building. One way to decarbonize is also to use bio-based materials. Cities are using kind of timber, wood, and so on, but it's relatively a new topic, and sometimes they don't have all the relevant information on this on the performance of bio-based materials. This is why we need capacity building, you know, to be made available to cities to inform both citizens that want to decarbonize, but also to the local actors that do actually the renovation. And I just finished on the point saying that it's very important when we talk about building decarbonization to link up all the policy files that are related to this topic. And currently we have the revision of the construction project regulation. It needs to align with the Epbd ambition. So like this, we will really tackle, you know, this whole decarbonization of the building, and we need to help like this all the local actors and the cities, you know, to really assess the global warming potential of the materials that we use in this building. So a last point on really aligning all these files related to the decarbonization of the buildings and not taking one by one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louise. And Paula, my final question to you, again, following up on what I asked you before, what are your expectations now of your co-legislators and going into, in preparation also for the trilogues?
Well, I think we are really lucky on the Commission side with the team that we have with the Czech Presidency, but also the team that we have on the Parliament side. And some of the elements that were mentioned by both Morten and Martin are really very important, and it's really this element of consensus. I think in this field is really very important because we need to bring citizens on board. And that starts with bringing the Council on board across all member states, and similarly bringing the Parliament on board across political parties. I think Mr. Cuffe's idea really go along those lines, really trying to build consensus, of course. But from the Commission side, we are definitely aware of the sensitivities, and we hope that we can all put our minds into keeping the ambition, but also finding a solution to the different sensitivities and to practical implementation that is indeed fundamental. So not only enforcement in the sense of having things that happen on the ground, like what I mentioned between the links of MEPs with the big targets in the ED and the Renewables Directive, but also make it happen on the other side for citizens. And for that, we really need this engagement and this consensus building across member states and across political parties.
Thank you very much. I think that consensus building and engagement is one of the key words of this overall discussion, and I'll wrap us up on that note. This was very dense. We could have, I think, spoken a lot more. I had many more questions that I wanted to get into, but we all have to get on with our day. So thank you all so much for being here and help us for reading our climate tractor and for taking it into consideration and for helping us bring awareness of these results. Of course, we don't want to be pushing doom and gloom. Precisely, we want to show the reality and then find real solutions to overcome and to make sure that we actually achieve our climate targets, and that Morten, as you said, that there isn't this, you know, sad, we don't have member states, or both you and Morten touched on this, very delicate situations of member states not being able to cope with some of the ambitions. And so I think we're very aware of that. And I thank you for your inputs, and on BPIE side, we will continue to do our best to provide as many solutions as possible, and also to keep you in check and to remind you when things are, when we're, you know, derailing from where we should be going. So thank you so much, and I wish you a good rest of your day and a good weekend. And thank you to all of our participants who joined us as well. Please remember, you can download our buildings tracker on our website. It's on the front page. We also have a report that we did a couple months ago, which actually provides practical policy recommendations. So for us, for BPIE, some of the key elements that we would say should be included in the Epbd. So please give that a read if you haven't, and share it with your friends and colleagues, and have a good weekend. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.